in a continuation of what you're getting here at Nexus Conference. We're going to take it into what is happening now in the real world with someone that many of you know, many of us admire, and he is making a big difference. I remember sitting and getting to know this gentleman through YouTube and YouTube videos, what he had done, telling people about what's going on, and he has the credibility. He's anti-war, and he's backing it up by being an ex-Marine. Now, some people might think, what do you mean ex-Marine? Once you're a Marine, always a Marine. Well, I'll let him tell you about that. His name is Adam Kokesh, and he is described by some as the worst PR for the Pentagon because he has rallied many veterans of the Iraq War to be for peace and to be against a lot of violence that's out in our society. He is out there defending and fighting for freedom in a wonderful way. I'm going to let him tell you about it as we bring him on the stage now. So join me in welcoming Adam Kokesh.
All right. We on with this? All right. Hello, Nexus. It's been an awesome conference, hasn't it? A really cool group, really cool gathering. By the way, I got to say, I bought Nexus when it was 4 cents each. And the reason I did was because of my good friend, Thomas Costanzo, who you might know as Morpheus, who happens to be sitting in jail in Arizona right now, facing federal charges for operating an unlicensed money transmitting business. I'm sure you guys have heard of this new wave of crackdowns on the Bitcoin community. And to me, I just see this as a little extra motivation, you know, because it's always, as an activist, being motivated by a sense of injustice that makes me do what I want to do, right? And I'm really excited. Mike Heiss is here because he helped organize an End the Fed rally in Philly just last week. And there's a great tradition. Yeah, for Mike Heiss, please. There's a great tradition of End the Fed rallies in this movement. And yet, I think even Mike would agree that it's a great mark of progress, that we're no longer just protesting, we are building. And there are conferences like this, like the decentralized conferences, like startup societies, like seasetting gatherings, where people are saying, you know, we're not going to just fight, we're going to actually work to make government obsolete. But I would argue that we're probably already there. So, if we could please, for everybody who's helped organize this, for Colin and the whole team at Nexus, please give it up for them and all the speakers who have made this event possible. So it's a bit of a different crowd here, right? Have you noticed that? So I haven't had a chance to talk to a lot of people. I just got in this afternoon. But how many of you would consider yourselves to be anarchists? Yeah! Okay, all right. I guess I'm in the right room then. How many of you would consider yourselves to be libertarians? All right. Any enthusiastic minarchists in the room? Oh, okay. Well, I guess just to finish the survey, any Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives? No? Not that kind of crowd? Okay. So I'm in the middle of a 68-city national tour right now, 110 days, going all over the country. It's the third one I've done like this. And the reason I love these so much is that I get to step out of the typical libertarian bubbles that we find ourselves in. And there's two distinct bubbles. One is the events that are kind of like this, where we pat each other on the back and tell ourselves how right we are about everything. And then there's the internet bubble, where we create, you know, a nice echo chamber for ourselves. But I get out and I travel the country in this the Freedomobile. I have a trailer and a Suburban, has the Freedom logo on it in giant letters. And so people at gas stations, this is my great sample of reference for, you know, what people are ready for. People at gas stations come up to me all the time, every single day. Hey, what's freedom? And I get, oh, hey, freedom. It's this book that I wrote when I was in jail for civil disobedience. It's about how we create a more harmonious, peaceful, and productive world by dissolving government altogether. And most of them go, Sounds like a good idea. And if there's one thing holding us back as a movement, it's not the Republicans or the Democrats or the NSA or COINTELPRO or anything like that. It's that we have this false negative perception of how we are going to be received with a message based on self-ownership, voluntarism, the non-aggression principle, universal nonviolence, peace and love, right? We're taught, don't talk politics and religion at the dinner table. You're going to offend somebody. Well, this isn't politics. Politics is the conversation of who do you point the guns of government at? And our answer to that question is nobody. So I want you to think about that in terms of being an advocate for freedom. That when you share this message, if you think of it as a political message, you get sucked into politics. And you want to argue with people and debate and play the zero-sum game. I'm right, you're wrong. Let's figure it out. As opposed to sharing what's important to you out of love and joy and compassion because you want to make the world a better place. And when you do that, you'll find that the reception is totally different. But there's something else that I think needs to happen in order for this movement to come into its own, to go from being a debate club to being a political force. We have to stop arguing philosophy, stop arguing ideals, stop being that debate club, and instead say we're going to create practical policy that immediately improves everyone's lives based on our principle. So people ask me on the road, well, what are you doing about it? And I tell them, I'm getting ready to run for president in 2020 on the platform of dissolving the entire United States federal government. And most of them go, sounds like a good start. You would be shocked how ready people are for this, how receptive they are. And sometimes when I come to a conference like this, I want to be like, okay, I'm the former Marine. I was just smart enough to figure out I was being lied to and taken advantage of, but still dumb enough to enlist in the first place, all right? So I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are way smarter than I am. And it feels like everybody at these conferences is talking about, we're going to, all these cutting edge technology and blockchain stuff, and then we're going to colonize the moon. And it's like, whoa. There are still people suffering here under governments. And I think of just my friend Morpheus as one case, but you can imagine of all the benefits of dissolving the federal government, we immediately get to release all political prisoners, including Ross Ulbricht. Now, because this is a bit of a unique gathering, I want to allow some time for questions tonight. And actually, we have the room until they kick us out tomorrow morning. So you guys might be stuck here for a while. But the benefits of dissolving the federal government. No more IRS. Yeah? No more NSA, no more FBI, no more Department of Transportation, because we hate roads, don't we? No more daylight saving time. For some reason, that's the one everybody's really enthusiastic about. Everybody's excited about that. We're gonna also dissolve the Department of Defense. It's pretty important, right? And one of the things that, I should point out, dissolving the federal government doesn't mean overthrowing anything. It doesn't mean abolition. It actually means a peaceful, orderly, responsible process. And this represents an important tactical shift for our movement that really is in line with all the technological innovations of decentralization that we're experiencing right now. It's the everybody gets what they want strategy. You're a liberal, you live in a liberal state. You're a conservative, you live in a conservative state. If I can't convince you that you should be free, you still want to be governed by someone, okay, fine. Would you rather be governed in your state where your voice and your vote have a chance of mattering, or by somebody in some far-off capital who doesn't care about you? But rhetorically, even in communicating this message, this gives us a whole other opportunity. When someone says, I think government should do X. All right, well, are you okay with government doing X just in your community? On a voluntary basis where you don't force anybody into doing X who doesn't want it, where you don't force X on any other community? And most people will say yes to that. And then essentially, they're libertarians too. You've heard this, right? Everybody's a libertarian, they just haven't realized it yet. Now, I was at a conference in Malta a couple of months ago, the Corex conference, where Hans Hermann Hoppe was the headliner. And now he describes himself as a right libertarian. Personally, if you're a libertarian because you believe in the core philosophical axioms of the ethics of this message, of self-ownership, of voluntarism, of the non-aggression principle, you're a libertarian, no adjectives needed. And I think getting past those kinds of petty divisions about aesthetics versus the ethics at the core of our message is really important. And Hoppe presents the ideal of a libertarian social order based on private property, community-based enclaves. So you can imagine if we got government in the United States, we were able to eliminate the federal government, which, by the way, is really just cutting off the most destructive, wasteful, evil layer of fat at the top. We're only talking about 3 million people out of 22 million who work for government at all levels in the United States. There are a lot more personnel doing useful things at the state and local level than at the federal level, where they just lose $6 trillion whenever they feel like it. So if we had eliminated the federal government, we eliminate the state governments, we get government down to the county level, guess what? We're done. We can all retire on the political side of things. We don't have to worry about the evils of government when it's localized down to the community level and it's essentially voluntary. I would say it doesn't really meet the definition of government at that point, right? So imagine, if you have a private community, you want to have a place where guns are banned. Okay, fine. I'm not going to live there. But if you post on your private property, no guns allowed, I'm not going to violate your property to impose my aesthetic preferences or how I want to live on your community. You want to live in a community where drugs aren't allowed? Well, I'm probably not going to go to any of your parties, but I'm not going to force drugs into your community, right? Maybe you want a place where no gay people are allowed. That's a little stickier, but I'll still probably stop short at mercilessly mocking you on the internet for your homophobia, right? So this gives us a whole other way of presenting the message that makes it practical and accessible and easy for people to understand as the everybody gets what they want strategy. So I want to share a little bit about my motivation for doing this. And as Terry mentioned, I was in the Marine Corps. I volunteered for a tour in Fallujah in 2004. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell a bunch of war stories because, you can see that stuff on YouTube. But there is a certain sense that you get from having not just seen that evil up close, but participating in it, that is really impossible to shake. In a way, I consider all of my activism a kind of atonement for what I did in Iraq. And my start in activism was with Iraq Veterans Against the War. It was a really powerful time, if you recall, back when, you guys remember when the war in Iraq was still up for debate? Well, it's really an ongoing tragedy. Where I was in Fallujah, still a quarter of the children are born with life-threatening birth defects because of depleted uranium and white phosphorus poisoning from what happened during the siege of Fallujah in 2004. And I know Ron Paul said, one of my favorite quotes from him is, you don't have to go to Iraq to read the Constitution. And of course, he was making that case in a very narrow political sense, but it really applies to everything else. If you understand that there are great evils being done in the name of government throughout the world, you cannot help be motivated by that. And I think, like I said, that's what really makes us activists, is that we are motivated by an unshakable, deep-seated sense of injustice. So a lot of us use the term waking up, right, to describe what we're talking about when you start thinking for yourself, when you stop just taking on the worldview of whatever you're told. And there's a great book by Dr. Mary J. Ruwart that was really instrumental in my awakening. And it's called Healing Our World in an Age of Aggression. And I really can't imagine a better phrase to capture what we are doing in advancing humanity past this phase of statism, past this phase of violence. Think about that. Healing our world in an age of aggression. And so I like to think of waking up as kind of like becoming a doctor. You know, you become a healer, right? You have some special knowledge when you see the potential of humanity moving past this and you're in a position to do something about it, even just to wake people up, to spread this message. So if you'll give me a little analogy freedom here, I'd like to think of waking up as sort of you're driving down the freeway and you become a doctor while simultaneously seeing an accident on the side of the road. And you want to stop and help, right? Because that's what you do. You became a doctor because you wanted to help people. And you pull over. And by the way, having done 3 national road trips like this, I've seen a few dead bodies on the side of the road. PTSD is not something that is unique to veterans. And imagine you come to the side of the road where you see this accident, and there are a dozen people on the side of the road literally bleeding to death. And you have 2 hands. And you know that you could jump in and you could save one person. And it's really tempting, right? When you see this great mess, you see this great injustice, you see all of this suffering, you say, well, I can help this one case, I can help this one person, I can do this one thing, this one issue, this one cause. How many of you have ever felt like being an activist, arguing issues, or talking to statists in some way? It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. Anybody ever feel that frustration? Right? You argue one issue, another one pops up. You beat back one bad law. You get one bad cop fired. Another one pops up. And if you play their game, if you play by the rules, you might fight inch by inch, and you might win some battles. And what will they do? They'll pat you on the head and say, oh, good little citizen. You follow the democratic process. Good for you. Here's a cookie and an I voted sticker. And what are they going to do? They're going to laugh at you behind your back and take a mile while you're not looking, fighting by inches. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to play whack-a-mole. I don't want to argue issue by issue. I don't want to fight case by case. I want to knock the legs out from underneath the whole goddamn table. That's the shift in strategy that we need to embrace if we want to take on big goals. We need to have solutions that are as big as the problems. So how do we present this in a practical way? Because we still need a lot of people to do this, right? You still think, you got up and you want to scream for help because you couldn't just save that one person. You want more hands. You need more people to join you. How many of you at some point in your activism have tried to get somebody involved in something and been frustrated getting turned down because someone said, oh, I'm watching Dancing with the Stars, right? Pretty much everybody who cares about anything has felt this frustration before. And so in this analogy, it's like you're getting up and you're yelling at people. Hey, we need help. You don't need to have medical training. I just need hands. I just need people to get involved. I just need something. And it feels like most people are in the fast lane, right? Like they can't hear us. And it's really tempting to be angry with them. It's really tempting to be resentful and frustrated, but it doesn't help. Because a lot of them are dealing with their own issues, their own legal, financial, medical, whatever. Some of them are doing things as activists that it might be hard for us to accept are more important than this. Just to put that in perspective, if any of you guys are about to find the cure for cancer, please don't stop and volunteer for my campaign. But that's not most Americans, right? That's not most people in the world. They're not those people in the fast lane. They're more like the ones in the slow lane, and they can hear you through the glass. They can look out the window. They can see the pain and the suffering. They see what we see. Even those that are watching the fake mainstream media, they get the same gist of it. The greatest evils of government are not done in secrecy. They're done in the open. And they just drive by. Like they don't care. But even that's not really the average American at this point, because they're more like the guy walking by sipping on a soda pop going, yeah, good luck with that, Doc. And holy shit, that's maddening, isn't it? But there's some good news in all of this. I've been doing this for 10 full years now. This movement has grown a lot. This movement has matured a lot. And I think we're ready to stop being a debate club. In a way, we've already won. You look at what's happening here. Government's already obsolete. We're already providing the alternatives. In a way, what we're doing in politics is kind of like coming in behind all of the innovators and picking up the mess and just sweeping up after them, right? So, I think we're at the point where we don't need to talk about screaming for help anymore. The biggest division in this movement is not between the philosophical factions, the anarchists, the minarchists, the constitutionalists, the voluntarists, whatever you want to identify yourself as. The biggest division of this movement is between the talkers and the doers. And we have enough doers now that we can do this. We can take this message to the mainstream. We can present it out of love and hope and compassion and share ideas that we're passionate about because we know in the age of the internet, they can't get away with the same kind of lies that they used to be able to. And one of the things that's so important to me about this is the anti-war message. That this is fundamentally anti-militarism. It was one of the things that I learned in the course of waking up, in the course of my activism in 10 years, having made every single mistake in the book possible. And you know, like we wake up and we shed our delusions about the state. Similarly, I've shed some delusions about activism. We don't have to wake everybody up. We don't have to get everybody to understand monetary policy or Austrian business cycle theory to get people on board with decentralizing government, the everybody gets what they want plan. It can be easy if we do it right, if we stay in that love and compassion in how we present this message. So, in sloganeering terms, how we present this to the American public, I got it backwards. Neutralize, privatize, localize. What we mean by that, neutralize, the platform is to go in on the first day, sign one executive order in which I resign. That's it. That's all I'm ever going to do as president, to become custodian of the federal government. I'm going in like a bankruptcy agent or a trustee to dissolve the assets and pay the creditors the best we can. And I'm not talking about the foreign governments. I'm talking about the American taxpayers. So, dissolving the federal government is going to be a significant process, but it's one that we can lay out in a single executive order. We've already got a legal team and a policy team working on this. It's really exciting to see how this message is already inspiring people to get involved, to get active, to embrace this strategy. And part of what we're doing is creating a way for your efforts to be leveraged in spreading the message. We want to maximize the efficiency of this. So, how many of you guys are fans of Bill Weld? Rumor has it, he's putting together an exploratory tour for 2020 for the Libertarian Party nomination for president. And if anything, it is incumbent upon us, when we have this incredible opportunity, this institution, the Libertarian Party, to defend that platform, to defend that brand, and make sure that no old party castaway associates their form of statism with libertarianism to the American people ever again. So, we're asking you to get involved with the Libertarian Party, to be delegates in 2018, to bring about this shift from being a debate club to being a political force, making sure the American people know that libertarians have taken over the Libertarian Party, and that we're no longer concerned about debating philosophy. When we have the preference, when we have the option, our preference is always for decentralization. Frankly, I don't think there's anything more un-libertarian or un-American or anti-freedom even than saying, I want to be president of the United States. To say, yes, I want to come up with libertarian policy that we're going to force on the entire nation. So, that's neutralize. All laws immediately unenforceable. Everything that the federal government is doing stops. It is now a custodial agency for the purpose of dissolving itself. Privatize. Now, you guys are going, wait a second, privatize, Adam, that's like a bad word in American politics, right? Well, we've been taught to think of privatization as taking widespread public resources and, with a few government bribes, putting them in the hands of a few rich assholes. That happens to be the opposite of ethical privatization. And I love to use the VA as an example. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to stand up and blow smoke up your butts, but how many of you are veterans? Anybody? Well, normally we have a lot more in these crowds. Hey, Ted, how often do you go to the VA?
Never.
Exactly. We know that the VA doesn't exist to take care of veterans. It exists to make it look like government cares about veterans so that they can keep convincing people to enlist. If that were not the case, we would not have over 20 veterans committing suicide every day in this country. There's no reason the VA shouldn't exist. It just shouldn't be funded by tax dollars, right? So what do we do about this? Again, we're not here to abolish or overthrow. We want to dissolve in an orderly manner so the VA can be privatized, spun off as a private institution. If you give it an endowment as you're dissolving the federal government and give every single veteran in America one single ownership voting share, you take those resources, you put them in the hands of veterans, I guarantee you're not going to have 20 veterans committing suicide every day. So, localize. Really easy, right? Take what exists at the federal level, orderly transition, get it down to the state level. Not that complicated. So, I got told, well, I guess a little bit of more personal motivation for me. I recently had a friend who was a veteran commit suicide. Actually hit me at the end of the Fed rally was when I found out a week ago. And it's... Right after I found out that my friend who was in the military committed suicide, I had someone come up to me and say, "Thank you for your service." And I was just floored. I'd never been so offended by that statement before. I always find it offensive. I'm being thanked for doing evil. And I usually come up with a very polite answer. I say things like, well, do you know who I was serving? I mean, are you thanking me for serving politicians and bankers and war profiteers? Like, really? That's, and I can engage with someone, in a happy, upbeat, jovial way, even when they come at me with something that I find as triggering as that. But the people who enlist in the military might be well-intentioned, but it really takes an incredible amount of propaganda, conditioning, and even ignorance to think that joining the military today has anything to do with serving this country. And I think what all of you do as activists, as innovators, as entrepreneurs, you really are the engine of this movement. You are the engine of this incredible shift in the human experience. You are the driving force behind the freedom movement and this progress that we're experiencing right now. So I'll just end the first part of this by saying thank you for your service. So I'm deliberately left, 6:44. We have at least 15 minutes for questions. So, in the back there, I'm sorry, I think you were first.
So we're going to get rid of the federal government. That's great. There's $19 trillion missing, at least that we know of.
Right.
And there's no Social Security, my money in the Social Security fund. It's just this piece of paper from the federal government that they use as funds. So how do I get my Social Security money? It's not there, without putting this more in debt. How do we get that $19 trillion back so that the criminals don't end up with basically more power than we have in terms of re-centralizing the world?
There's a lot in that. It's a very good question. I'd like to start by pointing out that if we really want to move to a more peaceful society, we have to give up a certain amount of materialism. We have to give up a certain amount of desire for perfect justice because it's impossible. It's never going to happen. We are the victims of the greatest Ponzi scheme in the history of humanity. And we kind of have to accept that if we want to move forward from it. And it's really tough, right? Because we got to fight this injustice. So in a sense, I have to say, I don't want to overpromise. I can't promise you that it's going to be perfect. I can't promise you that you're going to get your money back. But if it's possible, what we're going to do when we liquidate the federal government, when we fund all the agencies that spin off, and by the way, one of the great things we get to do in this process is release all of the records. No more secrets, no more lies. We finally get to find out once and for all whether the earth is round or flat. I know. I can't believe that's become a thing. Holy crap. Jeff Berwick, I'm going to call him out because he interviewed a flat earther. And I was like, all right, well, if Berwick's interviewing this guy, maybe I'll give him a chance. And I was like 30 seconds into it and was like, oh, I got to stop. I can feel myself getting dumber. But in the process of releasing the records, you can't just say, we're going to put everything on the internet. As nice as that ideal would be, right? You have to have a responsible process where personal private information that shouldn't be made public is filtered out. So there's going to be most likely some kind of ongoing process, whether it's through the Library of Congress or something like that, that would be funded with an endowment as we're dissolving the federal government. After we've done all of that, the remainder of the funds go to funding Social Security until that money either runs out or it's able to transition to an effective voluntary retirement system. The bigger question here is, what are we going to do about the Federal Reserve System, right? Now, ultimately, what's that?
Cube satellites.
Cube satellites. I thought you were going to say C4 or something. Yeah, okay, we'll take that. No, but what do we do about the Federal Reserve System? The answer to this question comes from what really should be the libertarian answer to everything, right? Let the market decide. If I'm able to take office, and this is going to depend on what is the position of the federal government at the time, are we going to be able to even dissolve the federal government or liquidate it into dollars? I don't know. But if the American people at that point, people of the world, are still using the dollar system, I mean, it is a private entity. You can say it's a private-public partnership, however you want to describe that relationship. We don't need to dissolve the Fed or take it away or get rid of it. We just need to reserve take away the violent backing of it from the federal government and let it die a peaceful, natural death. I don't want to say slow because I really hope it happens as fast as possible. But for my perspective, I use Bitcoin as much as I can. We take, I pay people in Bitcoin. I use barter. I don't have any savings that are enumerated in dollars. I still use the dollar in times when I have to. I haven't perfectly opted out of the system. But for the most part, I have. And I'd say that represents, I don't know, what do you guys think, about 5% of the population at this point that have deliberately moved the majority of their economics into counter-economics? How many would it take to send the dollar down the final inflationary death spiral? If 20% of the American people started doing this, if we just got Bitcoin up to maybe 4 times the level of acceptance, if we got to the point where the majority of the American people are willing to say, yeah, let's dissolve the federal government entirely, maybe we're already there. Maybe the dollar collapses before we get to win on this platform, and I'm literally going to clean up the mess, and that's it. So I don't want to overpromise. And I think it's really important to keep that in perspective. The best that we can do is say, we're going to liquidate the federal government. We're going to put it towards these specific purposes that are necessary for a responsible dissolution. And the remainder goes to fund Social Security until it runs out. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Associate follow-up.
I have to congratulate you. If I wanted to design a plan to dramatically increase centralization, I couldn't come up with a better one than you just laid out. Financial coup d'etat. A whole series of private parties have moved trillions out of the federal government. When you upload the economy, they will be able to buy everything up for a penny on the dollar. We will, if anything, we will shred the Constitution, and the centralization will be dramatic. In fact, your plan is very similar to the one that the American intelligence agencies used in Russia when the Soviet Union came down. And I believe they lost 25 million people. It's called financial depopulation. I really recommend that you look at the players and who has engineered the financial coup d'etat and take a serious look at what we need to do to enforce the Constitution and take our government back. We don't have a sovereign government. It doesn't have financial sovereignty. It doesn't have information sovereignty. If we take it back and re-engineer it, we can do all the things that you're suggesting. But what I'm telling you is if you implode it, you're going to implode the economy. 50% or more of every county, 3,100 counties, 50% or more of the incomes come from the federal government. You're talking about a shock doctrine that is disaster capitalism. Naomi Klein, Greg Palast has documented how it works in Latin America. If you do it in America, you're going to have radical depopulation.
I think with all due respect, I think you're grossly misrepresenting this platform. You're grossly misrepresenting what I'm proposing as a peaceful, orderly, responsible process. And if you're stuck on the Constitution, I think it's time to admit that the Constitution is a failed experiment, that as a means of restraining government, it has proven to be futile. And that concentrating power in government... Now, a lot of people think that when they wake up to this, that big government is always worse than small government. And I can prove that that's incorrect. And this is why the idea of decentralization, allowing communities to organize how they see fit economically without any shock to the system, having an orderly process where states are able to come up in a transition where they're able to take on all of the legitimate functions of the federal government that have anything to do with social order, gets us away from that central system, gets us away from the possibility of the evils that the federal government has made possible, that the Constitution has made possible, with the war powers, with everything else. The Constitution itself is an anti-freedom document. It was a step backwards from the Articles of Confederation. The greater authority here is a Declaration of Independence. It says we not only have the duty, but the right to alter and abolish systems of government that do not serve us. And it's clear that the United States federal government is un-American and not serving the American people at this point. Sterling Lujan.
Yeah, Adam, so I'm really excited about this idea of running for non-president and dissolving the federal government. So I'm curious, especially since you're interested in cryptocurrencies, using cryptocurrencies, so I'm curious, how can we help fund your campaign with cryptocurrencies or any other possible measure?
Well, thank you, Sterling. Appreciate that. We are technically running for not president right now because we are not filing FEC paperwork. And we are doing all of our business right now through the 501c3 nonprofit that we use to spread the message of the book, Freedom, which, by the way, we have a few copies here for free. Aaron, our business manager, is standing in the back. If anybody wants, we had a lot of books at the beginning of this conference. Almost all of them are gone. But we want to make sure that if you ask a question, you get one. Or if you want to go talk to Aaron, if you want to get more involved, he'll be there in the back. And first of all, Sterling, thank you for the transition, because Aaron also has some flyers about how to get involved with the campaign that he'd like to pass out at this point. You got them there, Aaron? Awesome. Thank you, brother. So, yeah, cryptocurrency is huge for this because it gives us the flexibility to do things, obviously, outside of the purview of the government when it comes to filing FEC paperwork and doing what we can as individuals rather than as corporate entities. So yes, we are very excited. Actually, most of our contributions come through Bitcoin right now. And if you want to donate, you can go to thefreedomline.com and click on donate, and greatly appreciate any support that makes this possible. So thank you. Mike.
You mentioned political prisoners like Ross and Morpheus. A group of us have, if you go out to where the vending area is, we have printed quite a large number of T-shirts that we're selling to raise money for Morpheus. I just wanted to make a plug for that because it's relevant, and you know, he's in prison, and you know, we don't know what the outcome of that's going to be, and whether it's for his commissary account or for him to rebuild when he gets out. We're looking to raise some money for him, so that's why we made those shirts, and they're out there for sale. Excellent.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for doing that work. And when we were in the panel earlier with Lynn Ulbricht, she mentioned a website that I started called activistsunderfire.com, and it's just very much in the preliminary phase right now. But if any of you know of people who are in jail who need that kind of support, please go on there. You go to activistsunderfire.com. It takes you to a section on our forums, and you can create a thread that shows people how to get plugged in to help individuals who are in jail. Yes, I'm sorry.
What do you anticipate are your biggest challenges in your campaign?
Is that Merritt?
Yeah, it is.
Hey, what's up, brother?
What do you anticipate are going to be your biggest challenges in your campaign, and how do you see yourself overcoming them?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to answer that, but I think the biggest one ideologically, when we talk about dissolving the federal government, localizing it down to the state level so that states are the highest form of government in the land, most people in America understand that kind of decentralization, localization. They prefer that. They want that. You know, hey, you want a 30% pay raise, a lot of obvious benefits. But the one thing that people have a real attachment to is the militarism part. And that, I think, and although I thought was going to be the biggest objection, it hasn't been so far. Maybe it's because we're still organizing within the libertarian movement, within the party, working towards the nomination. But when people ask the question, but without a military, who will keep us safe? I have to say, I have to reject the premise of your question, because having a military actually makes us less safe. And what an un-American idea is it that we should have a standing military providing for national security when the founders of this country were against the very concept of a standing army, because they knew that the militia defense was the only legitimate defense of a public, of a people, and that the military was the government's monopoly version. And as with any monopoly, you have all of the disastrous consequences, except when it's the military as the monopoly, it means that innocent people die too. But in this day and age, in the age of the internet, it's impossible to lie to people enough that you can convince millions of gullible young, mostly men, to dress up in silly costumes and meet in the middle of a field where none of them live to kill each other because they're wearing different colors. And if you really want to defend a territory, you know that, like if the Chinese send 1 million troops to the West Coast, do you really want to dress up your defenders to meet them and make it really easy for them to kill each other? Or do you want to let them march in and shoot them in the back? Now, I'm not suggesting that that's how it's going to go, but let's have the effective deterrent. It's not mutually assured destruction, and the founders were right when they said that the greatest defense of any population was a well-armed people who refused to be governed by anyone. And re-embracing that and getting people to understand that is so important. And this is why I'm really excited that we're already organizing Military for Kokesh. We've got a group of veterans on Facebook that are organizing, doing that. And I really think that that is ideologically the biggest obstacle, because people have to see that we don't live in a world where that's a threat anymore. You know, hey, we need to have nukes to defend ourselves against North Korea? Like, really? For the United States to start a war with North Korea would be like beating up on the special needs kid because he told a your mama joke. I mean, it's just, get a little freaking perspective. This is the only government that has ever dropped nuclear weapons on cities. And you look around the world, it's not like the cities that don't have nuclear armaments are being invaded left and right. Costa Rica hasn't had a military since 1953. There are actually over a dozen countries that don't have any military whatsoever. And we live in a different world. I think it's really time for people to accept that. But, like I said, I haven't really run into this objection that much. I get it online. I have a feeling those are a lot of Pentagon-funded trolls. But in a way, it's really just the John McCains of the world who are so attached to the violence of government that they're going to need therapy before they're ready to hear this. And we don't need everybody. You know, we don't need to wake everybody up. We just need to build a consensus that government should be decentralized. So, thank you for that question. Yes?
Okay, so I love your ideologies. Just so everybody knows, I'm not a Democrat, Republican, or Libertarian. I'm an individual in a group of collective individuals. I'm all for the decentralized movement. I was one of the first group of 100 Bitcoin miners with a group of friends, so I was a part, of that movement, of that decentralized movement. But it is done through a very technologically organized system, a democratic system that we've seen with the SegWit upgrades that have thresholds of 80 to 90% of a democratic agreement to move forward. So, I love your ideology. I really love the libertarian ideology. The problem I see, and I have concerns, I have two main concerns about this movement, is, okay, how is a decentralized movement going to happen with a centralized party? So, I'd be curious what you would think about forming a new party, or running under any current party, but backing it with a technological blockchain platform that allows for direct voting on every single issue, every single proposition, and anybody can propose something, and anybody can fund it through the app. Kind of works like Reddit. If something gets more popular, and granted, this is like the simplistic basis of this system, but if the system was developed as a party platform, a decentralized platform, and a candidate, kind of what you're saying, you're running for president, but you're not president, the candidate runs on top of that platform to get into the system that currently exists, right? The system is very...
And within the system, replace it with the blockchain-based one that you're advocating.
Once the decentralized candidate is in office, and so I had this idea a while back, and I looked online, and in Venezuela, some people have this idea, they call it the online party, and it's backed with an app called Democracy OS. So it's basically the party member or candidate says, hey, everybody get on this app, and citizens will decide what to do. And you can, again, decide what that majority threshold is, and that can be voted on collectively.
Hold on, can I, because you're going off on something that's a really awesome tangent, and that's huge, and that's already happening. And so I think what you're doing in looking at this is making a bigger deal out of it than it is. What I would take as a perspective on that is we already have that happening. And we shouldn't be beholden to the existing structures of territories under governments to introduce such systems. They should be happening globally. And they are. That's what Bitcoin is. That's what Nexus is. That's what every cryptocurrency is, right? That's what all the blockchain technologies are. So it's like it's already happening. In a way, you're taking a step backwards to say, okay, let's work with the government and put the blockchain into that. It's already obsolete. It's already gone. What I'm talking about here is really not a big deal. To say, look, we're just going to get rid of this layer of fat at the top. We're going to decentralize. The big deal was the introduction of Bitcoin almost a decade ago. The big deal was the flourishing of the internet that we've all participated in and made possible. The big deal is this new connectedness between human beings that makes all of these things possible. So that's happening. I think if anything, if we want that to happen, we need to keep government as far away from it as possible. So having a system like you're saying is awesome when it's separate. If you combine that with the existing structures of government, I think you hold back the development of those technologies and those kinds of voluntary systems that are already making government obsolete.
But so my other concern is the abruptness of your strategy or your idea. It's so abrupt. As we see with the decentralized movement, it is coexisting with other systems, the banking structure, right? So, like, I have all my holdings in Bitcoin. I still utilize my bank. I still utilize a third-party company, Coinbase.
Okay.
So I'm still utilizing these existing structures. It's a transition, and it's not this abrupt. We're shutting down the banks. Blah blah blah. That's not.
We're not shutting down the banks.
We're not.
No, that's not my plan. Like I said specifically, with the Federal Reserve System as an example, like you want an orderly transition. It's just what we're talking. What is abrupt about this plan, about this platform, is it is an abrupt end to the violence of the system. It is an abrupt end to that injustice which cannot continue another day, for which there is no upside whatsoever. The administrative transition will happen in whatever speed it needs to be done in a way that prevents the kind of shocks to the system or any kind of economic turmoil that would result from this. The only economic turmoil that people are going to experience are from the people who are benefiting from the federal government. Yeah, I want to put all the IRS agents out of a job. Yeah, I want to put all the defense contractors out of a job. Yeah, I want to put all the people who are profiting from the evil in the world out of a job immediately. And I have no problem with that being abrupt. So, yes, sir.
Aren't you a little bit worried about the effects that a balkanization down to the county level would have, sort of logistically? I mean, like, let's say your county had a reservoir in it, and the county downstream of you needed that water. Like, that county could essentially hold the other county hostage. And I mean, you just repeat that, across like 34.
Sure. No, there are a lot of hypothetical situations that are going to have to be worked out that I don't have every answer for.
Well, I know, but it's kind of a big one. I mean,
how will we work together to cooperate to utilize natural resources? Yeah, absolutely. And I really look forward to whatever the market's going to come up with. It's going to be a better nonviolent alternative to the violent government system that we have today.
The market will say water costs $1 a gallon.
Well, with competition, it will be a lot less. I mean, you're right. Hold on, no, you're right to point this out. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean to discount the hypothetical that you're presenting. It is something that we are going to have to address. It is absolutely critical that when we get government down to that level, that we have compassionate people involved, developing the systems that are property-based, that are voluntary, that ensure what I think is a fundamental right along with freedom based on a human being who owns himself to equitable access to natural resources.
Violence as well. I just see that as kind of a waypoint for refuelization.
You should read Eleanor Ostrom.
Hold on, what do you mean by refeudalization?
I don't consider it a federal system. I consider the United States
A feudal system. Okay. Well, in order for that, you need to have the concentration of the center. What we're saying is decentralize. So you're right. To answer your question succinctly, you are absolutely right to point out that that is a challenge that we will face. And I would much rather deal with the challenges of how do communities cooperate with shared natural resources than how do we stop the next war from happening? How do we get Ross Ulbricht out of jail? How do we keep people like Morpheus from getting locked up? How do we stop the horrors of what's happening in Fallujah right now? So yes, it's an issue. It's a challenge. It's a tiny, insignificant, minor one compared to the challenges that we face with big, violent central governments.
The alternative might be perfecting the federal system.
No.
I don't know. I mean,
it's been tried and failed, and the answer is that if there is going to be a larger centralized system in the world for certain functions, that it has to be voluntary. And it's not going to be based on the governments and collectives that governments have formed by wars and circumstances of history. It's going to be defined by individuals with shared interests. Will there be a global agency that manages your reputation, a la the blockchain? Sure. Would you call that global government? Not if it's voluntary, but could we have a global system for natural resource allocation? Could we have a global consensus of what constitutes appropriate use of natural resources with appropriate consequences for people that are based on withdrawing economic contributions from them, based on ostracism, based on ethical means of addressing what behavior we don't like, rather than the government system, which leads us to, you want to perfect the federal system? The federal government is the biggest polluter in the world today. If you're talking about, hey, how do we better use natural resources to meet human needs? Hey, I would think you'd be pretty keen on, let's get rid of the single biggest polluter in the entire world. Yes, sir.
Yeah, regarding voting, I think we have that ability with cryptocurrency. We vote with our money, our value. We choose where to spend our time and our efforts to support the systems that we want to. If you work inside the system for money, you're contributing a portion of your labor to the federal government. So you have more money, more time to donate to such things, to vote in a sense, in a voluntary sense. You choose to fund what you believe in rather than being forced to fund what other people believe in.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. And in the back, James?
Just to bring light to the discussion around water. I own a water tower or reservoir or something. One thing that I think is just want to throw out there was the core of decentralization in general, not just for currencies, not just for government, but I can capture all of my drinking water for the entire year off my rooftop in 15 minutes in a heavy rain. I can produce all of my eggs from a few chickens in my backyard. I do this. This is what I'm involved in, this off-grid living and sustainability. And if we take it to the concept of I'm a sovereign individual and human being, and I take responsibility for my own life, the more radically we can do that, not just with cryptocurrency and decentralization, decentralizing everything and helping each other on a local level as much as possible, that is going to help us solve these problems, I think, essentially.
Absolutely. Thank you, James.
It's not just resources, though. It just takes one bad actor, one bad county with a strong military.
Okay, so this question is asked sometimes philosophically as, if we got rid of government entirely, what's going to stop it from coming back, right? That's essentially what you just proposed, right? Right, in a worse form, potentially. Which is really a very, very unrealistic hypothetical. Because and first of all, the question, again, to use the meme version of this analogy on the internet, right, is, if a doctor said, I'm going to take away your cancer, would you say, well, I don't know, doc, it might come back? No, you want the cancer removed if that's what it is, right? So to put it in realistic terms, why that is just an unrealistic possibility. If you believe in the message of freedom as that nonviolence is always superior to violence in human relationships, right? Well, then in order for that to happen, we get to the point where we're so much more free, so much more prosperous, so much more peaceful. We live in a world without war because government has been eliminated or localized down to that local voluntary level. In order for your scenario, in order for that to happen, you said one bad apple. One bad apple can't make a war happen. They need public consent. They need public support. In order for that one person to have that, he's going to have to get up and say, hey, remember when we had government? Remember the taxes? Remember the regulations? Remember the wars? Remember the surveillance state and the police state? Wasn't that awesome? Let's do that again.
Doesn't, remember when our drinking water cost 10 cents a gallon?
Your hypothetical of water prices going up without government is also unrealistic. And if you want me to break down why that's unrealistic too, because the markets progress, we become more efficient at providing resources from people. So
I understand a little bit about, how economics work.
So how is it possible for...
Where there's scarcity.
Okay.
And there's demand.
Yes.
Okay. There's often suffering. And where there's suffering, there is an appetite for coercion.
Okay.
Right? And that's why you have looters. We can't buy bread. You go to the store and grab it. So my appeal is that maybe we stop at some... I'm all for decentralization. I'm a decentralization guy. But we stop and consider that sometimes we go too far. What if it goes down to the household?
What's wrong with that? Can I opt out on my own property? Can I live in my own household on my 10 acres in Arizona and be free?
What if, I don't know. It gets a little, it's like reduction to the absurd. And I think that we do need to institute maybe not a central government, but, I like strong state, state versus federal, as small as possible, but maybe not minutely small. I don't know why the county is just some arbitrary.
Well, no, it's just because we have that existing structure. No, really, ultimately, it should be down to the individual. Self-government.
It's curious. I like to believe that. But...
All right, we'll just do two more right there, gentlemen, if you would. In front first.
Without government, how would I know that murder is wrong?
Is that a serious question?
No, sir.
Okay. Without government, how will I know that murder is wrong? You're making the point that, yes, I appreciate that. Thank you.
My question is, I got into you years ago when you used to do a lot of anti-war videos. Mm-hmm. And if you could just talk some more about your anti-war stance, specifically about young people enlisting in the military. Why, obviously, from your point of view, that'd be a bad idea. If you could just talk some more about that.
Sure. Well, it's been a real incredible honor as part of my activism that's been supported by so many people and made possible by everybody who's supported me. That I get the kind of feedback from people who say, thank you, Adam, because of you, I didn't enlist in the military. Because of you, I found something better to do with my life. And really, that's just incredible feedback to get. So the enlisting in the military today, I don't think that, if I'm going to back up, if I may, to answer that point in this context. One of the illusions that I've shed in the course of my activism was the idea that we can end the state by agorism. You've heard of this philosopher. I'm a fan of agorism. I practice it. I do as much as I can in counter economics. How many of you know what percent of the American population voted in the first presidential election? The very first. One, right? Yeah. Well, it was less than 2% of the population. And they didn't say, oh, shucks, we don't have a mandate. I guess we're all going to have to go home now. They said, okay, screw you. We're government. We're in charge now. And so in terms of withdrawing that consent by not enlisting in the military, I don't think that's what's going to do it. They've already got drones, flying robot killing machines. Yeah, they're here. People raise this specter like, oh my God, we're going to have this futuristic world where government's wars are conducted by robots. We already have that. So I think what's more important, what that represents in talking about an anti-war message and making sure that the youth understand this, is not that they don't enlist in the military, but that they bring that awareness into society. That they don't put up with the creation of wars based on lies. That they don't accept things like 9/11 as an excuse for invading countries that had nothing to do with it. That kind of thing. So in this point, I think there's a sort of intermediary transition to localized militaries first. In the process of dissolving the United States military, for example, the nuclear arsenal is not a defensive weapon. I'm sorry. You can argue this all you want. It's bullshit. It doesn't conform to any ethical framework or any realistic framework to say that, yeah, mutually assured destruction is a reasonable means for countries to defend these populations, these territories. Because it's not people doing that. It's not like all the people got together and had a vote and decided, yeah, we need nuclear weapons. It was that governments needed those things in order to defend their territorial monopolies. And this is a really important understanding of what war is. We have been lied to from the very beginning when we are told that wars are fought between countries. You think about it for a second, it's bullshit. Wars aren't fought between countries. They're conducted by governments using violence to expand their protection rackets. So when I convince someone to not enlist in the military, it's not because I want them to go work for the IRS. It's because I want them to take this awareness into the world and say, we are not going to consent, we are not going to support the system materially in any way whatsoever. And I think that's the awareness that's growing. Like I said, we've already won. We're already there. We have the technology. Government is already obsolete. Even the challenges that you present, sir, about balkanization, about potential disagreements between different counties or local governments, or the threat of another government coming up and being more violent. We already have better mechanisms of solving these problems than centralized systems of force and coercion. And I would hope that people like you who are plugged in and have this greater awareness, what I think I bring to the conversation of a sense of human progress over history, we are living in the most peaceful times in human history. This is a beautiful thing to celebrate when you understand that nonviolence is a measurement of freedom. Freedom is what you have when no one is forcing their will on you. If there's violence, it means that someone's freedom is being violated, even if it's defensive violence. If you're defending that there was an attack, right? So I would hope you can appreciate that what we are talking about here is not revolutionary so much as evolutionary. But Thomas Jefferson said we should have a revolution with every generation. Are we a little bit behind?
But don't you
So,
think he meant to revolve the power?
Right, thank you. Right. So, and what we are talking about will be thought of as revolutionary. But you know that it's evolutionary. And this might sound a little funny coming from me talking about patriotism, because I'm the guy who made the video called Patriotism is for Bitches. Some of you remember that one? Describing how if your love for country is defined by borders, on a map by politicians and circumstance of history, then you're making yourself subservient to something, as opposed to being a confident individual. But there is one thing that does make me a patriot, and it's that there's an Americanism that is bigger than this country, that is the heritage of the first American Revolution, that really belongs to humanity. And it's the tradition that we have here of putting our lives on the line, of standing up against injustice, and of overthrowing empires. In one way or another, the federal government of the United States is not going to last forever. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. And I'm actually committed to this campaign for as long as it takes. We are going to win because we know they're not going to last forever. And if we don't win in 20, I'm going to run in 24. And I'm going to run in 28. I think realistically, if you look at the linear progress of this, if we don't come to some black swan moment, I'll be running to win in 2020. We'll be ready to win. We'll have the executive order completely laid out. It'll be on the website. People will know what they're voting on. The objective in 2020 is to plant the flag on this idea so that the American people know that they had the option to vote nobody for president. And if we just get somewhere around 5 to 10%, that'll be enough to accomplish that goal, so that we can be competitive in 24. And if we don't win in 24, I'm very confident that if the federal government is still around in 28, that's when we're going to win. This is a long-term project. And while you understand it as evolutionary, it will be written of in history books as the final American Revolution. Make no mistake, what we are doing is fulfilling the promise of the first American Revolution, catching up with what the founders expected the continuation of that progress to be. Because America is too good for this government. You see how we get to use their propaganda against them that way? You can pledge allegiance all day long. Doesn't matter. America is too good for this government. We don't have to be united under a single governing system to be united in Americanism, to be united in the ideals of freedom. And so, when we complete this, we will have lived up to the promise of the first American Revolution and finally free America. So thank you very much for sticking around tonight. Thank you for a very engaging question and answer session. And I'm sorry if I'm a little shaggy. I'm a little tired. I flew in this morning, getting up at 4:30 to get here. We're leaving tonight at 2 in the morning to drive back to Denver to catch a flight to speak at an Audit the Fed rally in Boston tomorrow. So it has been a whirlwind because there is a lot of demand for this message. People are looking for solutions. So thank you for your service to humanity by being a part of this evolutionary process that we're going through right now.